Hello and welcome today to the Find Your Birth Confidence Summit, and I'm Charlotte Kanye, and today I'm welcoming Rachel Elisabeth, who is a doula and a mum 4 times over, including to quite a recent newborn, Rachel. So welcome today. Thank you so much for being here. And you have so much experience with birth. I'd love to hear some of your birth stories and what you've learned.
Hypnobirthing instructor with creative birth, and as Charlotte says, I am a mother of 4. I've got babies who range from 15 to 5 weeks old, so quite a house full. So Charlotte's invited me to talk today on a theme of trusting our bodies through a physiological birth experience and what that might look and feel like. Does that sound kind of right with you, Charlotte?
Beautiful. Yeah, that sounds great. You've got so many different birth experiences, haven't you? You went through lots of different things in all 4 births because they're all so different each time, and it's given you a lot of interesting things.
That's right. I'm going to talk a little bit about the experiences that I've had with my own births in this talk, and you will notice a lot of variations of normal, which could be handled very differently in a hospital birth setting. All of my births were home births, so I hope that you take away how things can be handled differently in a physiological setting, and yeah, just how that looks. Okay.
Wonderful.
So I'll start with a little bit of my story. I started out like a lot of people on the interviews that I've had, and a lot of mums, very, very afraid of giving birth. I really didn't know how to deal with my situation as being a woman, and realizing that I was going to have children, and didn't know how I was going to cope with it. So I went on a bit of a journey of trying to figure out what birth was all about. I don't know why. I was about 20 and it just kind of overtook me. I wanted to know, and being me, I like to get information about everything. So I started to find out about how birth looked in hospital, what sorts of help mums were given, and I sort of felt like birth was given such a really bad rap, and as I sort of learned a bit more, I came across people that were having positive births, and this was kind of in the early days of the internet 15-16 years ago, so it was quite hard to come across these things. And when I came across mums that were having these positive births and free births, I thought, I found something that really sort of resonates with me. I'm not your typical sort of hippie or woo person, but I had become a vegetarian when I was 17 after living with a lady who had cured her own cancer by diet, which was one of the things that was happening in the 90s. People were going on these all raw diets, and she was one of them. And what I took away from that was how she'd really taken responsibility for her own health, and so that link kind of resonated with me, of taking responsibility for our births as well, that we could actually make a difference to the outcome of our births. So then when I started to hear about positive birth, everything started to fall into place, and I became informed on the procedures that were current. So there was lots of things that you would find, like in America, there would be things like standard enemas and episiotomies and different things that we today, there's all changed, and we'll mention that as I go through my birth stories, things that are really different now, even in England in the last 15 years, what's normal and what isn't. One thing we just spoke about previous to this interview was people being offered what's called a membrane sweep, which is something that helps induce the birth. So there's all these kinds of interventions and options that you have in hospital that seem to sort of go along with different trends, and they change over the years. So I'll be talking a little bit about those as we go through. Okay. So when I got pregnant, I was 21 and I was in good health, but I was dealt my fair share of sort of birth fear from the midwife. Obviously, in England here, we go to a midwife as our first port of call, and her first kind of reaction to me as a 21-year-old in an area where there was a high teenage pregnancy actually area, because I lived up in the north of England, and her first words to me were, well, I'll book you a cesarean, to which I was in complete shock, because having been on my journey of what I wanted and didn't want, that was really my last option, and I didn't understand why. And she said, well, because you're very small and your feet are small and we don't know whether you'll be able to give birth. And so I was quite put out by that, and I thought to myself, I don't really want this lady at my birth. But there where we lived, you did actually see the same midwife more than once, so it was a good chance that she would be the midwife at my birth. So I was already starting to feel a bit anxious about that. I continued on my journey about finding positive birth and trying to speak on forums with people who had really good experiences, and I came across something called hypnobirthing, which was very, very rare. There was one man who taught hypnobirthing in the area. I was in the northeast of England, he was in Yorkshire, and he drove 2 hours to teach hypnobirthing to me at my home, which was really lovely. And I loved the positivity of hypnobirthing, but what I really took away from that actual experience with the instructor that came to me, was that he really believed in birth, and it was the first person that I'd come across in real life who'd experienced being around birth and who felt really positive about it. So that is just having people around you in real life that that believe the same as you is just so important, I feel. So all of the hypnobirthing exercises were fantastic, but actually having that real person was a real game changer, I think, for me. And he did actually ask me, because I've just mentioned my bit of a problem with the midwife, he did ask me, do you plan to call the midwives? Now, I hadn't told anybody at that time, but my plan was actually to have a free birth, but I didn't know how I was going to cope, and so I had booked a home birth, which there weren't any of up there, and they had to build a home birth kit for me, and they didn't know what I'd need, and they put pethidine in my fridge and everything like this. And so so they basically were sort of trying out what home birth was like for me, and that was my plan. So I had it all in place, but I was going to see how long I could go, and if I could have the baby without them there, that would be my ideal. But I didn't know. So here's how it went. And my backup plan was going to be that if I did have to transfer, I wanted to have a cesarean, because all the choices that I knew I might face in hospital, I just didn't feel comfortable with. So I decided that I would say, right, we'll go straight to that cesarean then. So that was my sort of deal breaker, if you see what I mean, was having to transfer. So I woke up about 5 o'clock, and I felt a bit odd. I ran myself a bath with clary sage, and I was very late. I was 10 days late with this baby, but by my dates I was even later than that, and I didn't tell them, because I was worried that I would have to go in for an induction, and I didn't want to do that. So I got into the bath with some clary sage, because I was like, right, let's bring this on. And then I had this huge, what I thought must be a contraction, and it just felt like a knife was digging into my stomach, and I thought, oh my goodness. And I just felt that panic. I felt my face like sweating. I thought, oh no, like, what is this going to be? Is this the beginning? Is this, where are we at? And because I had my hypnobirthing, I put on we had a tape then, I put on my tape, and I found that I gave myself a pep talk, and I was like, right, if this is what it is, this is what I'm going to deal with. And I found that the pain kind of disappeared. So I was happy with that. I stayed in the bath, and after that, the sensations that came, they were really intense, and they were sort of, I can only describe these rushes of energy. It was like being squeezed from the outside, and also this sort of understanding in myself that my body was taking over. But there wasn't any pain, and there wasn't any fear. So, and this is me who had worried about just about every possible scenario. So not having fear was a real surprise and a bonus for me, but I'm sure that made the difference. So the contractions or surges or rushes, whatever you want to call them, they kind of went through me, and all of my emotions would intensify. So I was excited and I was joyful and very, very angry at times. And I would get out of the bath and walk around. And finally, I sort of followed my need to sit on the toilet. And I was shocked because I could hear myself vocalizing in these kind of low, deep growls. And I didn't really know. I was just kind of going with the flow at this point, didn't really know what was going on. I could feel the baby moving down, but it's only been a couple of hours from that bath now. So I thought, well, this can't be really labour. This, or if it is, it would be what they call latent phase. Because I wasn't in pain and I wasn't screaming, and nothing that they told me to expect. I hadn't had any hospital antenatal, but from the midwife and things that I'd been told to expect was happening. Even the contractions themselves were not coming regularly. They were coming regularly, but they weren't coming at a certain time length in between. So there was nothing to really time. They were just coming. And I just wasn't really in that much pain. I wasn't really in pain. I was just having these intensive kind of feelings. So I evaluated this, and I filled up the sink with cold water and just like shoved my face in. And I think at this point, somewhere around this point, my then husband, he called the labour ward and said he thought I was having the baby, because 10 days late, you're not really going to think much else at this point. When he described what was happening, they weren't bothered. They were like, oh, well, you might be early labour, you know, it's nothing to worry about at this point. But then a couple of moments later, I was standing in the bathroom next to the sink where I'd been cooling my face down, and I went from standing to crouching down on the bathroom floor and watching my baby's head born. And at this point, there was no pain, there was no ring of fire, there was surges, and there was a natural numbness. I don't even know how else to describe it. I just wasn't in pain. I didn't push. My body did these huge movements, which is obviously pushing, but I did no conscious pushing, anything like that. And I was laughing because as his head came out, he obviously, I'm quite dark, and my son had this just full head of ginger hair, which just made me laugh. And I saw him, and it all sort of appeared in slow motion. So his head came out, saw his little face, he turned, and then instinctively I got down on all fours, and I said to his dad, I said, you need to check if the cord's around his neck. The cord is around his neck. And I just knew. It was almost like I'd kind of had an idea from the baby before, because he would do these funny movements. And I said, you know, if you carry on doing these movements, the cord's going to get stuck around your neck. And as if I knew that's what had happened. So he just looped it off his head and caught him as he flew out. So we had an instance there of a cord around the neck, which if you know the website Midwife Thinking, you can find out a lot about what happens when there is a nuchal cord and how that affects birth in a hospital setting or in a home setting. But what actually happened was that the cord was very loose, and so it was able to slip over his head, and he came with no problems.
It's quite common. It's more common than you think, isn't it, when they do all those gymnastics earlier on, and it's not really anything to panic about. Like, I think people are worried about it so much, and yet it's not really something to panic about.
It is quite common. the cord itself is covered in a type of jelly, which
Mm.
makes it very easy to sit on and off of the baby's head. I mean, obviously there are going to be emergency situations with anything,
Yeah.
but it is quite common for a Nuchal cord to not cause problems, which I found out later on. I didn't really have that
I
idea. I
love
just knew at the time.
I love the way
Sorry.
that I love the way that you knew you without without seeing, without any kind of logical thing, but you just knew, and that you had that instinct, that thing. It's like another picture, like you could see with different eyes, inner eyes. And I love that, because I
That's
think
it.
it's not like more people can do it than they think. So, you think of it being as a psychic thing that only psychic mediums can do, but actually, particularly in that
No.
ultimate state of labour with your baby where you're so connected to them, it's just another skill, another ordinary skill that we've all got.
I really think we all do have that, because there's nothing that I tried. I'm not a psychic. I hadn't really done any type of meditation or anything that would cause me to think I can see what my baby's seeing. It just happened at the time that I knew, and I called out for it, get the cord off. Like, it's just, it was instinctive. And as I go through the other births, you'll see that there's other times that this has happened. And again, it's not anything, I'm not sort of anything other than a normal person, really, and I don't see why any other women giving birth wouldn't have the same experience, because there's nothing that I did or do differently to try and experience these pictures from my babies. That's just what happens,
Yeah, I hope
really.
it's reassuring and inspiring, because we often worry about what we don't know and can't know in birth, and yet the instinct of a mother is so strong that you can know so much, that if you follow that, if you have the confidence, as we're talking about confidence, to follow what your instincts, they will guide you like your body guided you as to what you needed. And that's really great. Carry on.
And oh no, I was just going to add that where I've been working for mums as well, it's incredible what they know. Even mums that go into it with no idea that they're going to know, like I did, that they're going to know what they need. You'll find mums that know if they need extra help, absolutely know, and will call for help when they hadn't planned to. Or on the opposite, you get mums that realise, no, I don't want this intervention or this help. And they just know, that baby's around the corner or whatever it is. So it is amazing what mums know about the birth of their baby without doing anything to know it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there we have baby number one arrived, and it was all lovely. The atmosphere was lovely in the room. He sneezed, he jumped, and then took his first breath and screamed, and everything was fine. 3 hours really from that contraction in the bath, and maybe 4 hours from me waking up that morning. So that was quite
Really fast.
a fast birth experience. But when the midwife arrived, it was the midwife that I hadn't particularly got along with, and the atmosphere just went out the door. She seemed upset that we birthed without her, and she managed the placenta in a forceful way, which I felt really went against what we'd done. Now, as it happened, I really had wanted the cord to pulsate and finish pulsating, because that's something that at the time wasn't policy at all. The policy was to cut the cord immediately as the baby was born, but now we have delayed cord clamping, which is something that I was really adamant that I wanted. So luckily, by the time the midwife arrived, the cord had stopped pulsating, so I felt like the baby got everything that he needed from that placenta, though actually managing the placenta was policy, and that's what she had. She didn't do anything that she wasn't meant to do, but I felt that kind of took away from my physiological experience, if you like. So what I just wanted to say about that was just don't underestimate the different people in the room with you, and if you don't feel comfortable with somebody, it's absolutely your right to ask them to leave or ask for a different midwife or do things differently. So people do bring a different aura and a different feel into the room. Just quickly as well, breastfeeding support at that time was really minimal and it was very difficult. And I feel like that's really come a long way. So I just wanted to mention that if you are breastfeeding, there's a lot more training gone into it and a lot more help. There is still room for improvement in that area, but again, that's just something that's really come along in the past 15 years, that people have a lot more information, a lot more patience with breastfeeding, a lot more understanding of what's normal and what isn't normal with it. So
yeah, I think the big key thing there is to get support if you're struggling with anything, because there's so many myths and dialogues about breastfeeding, it take a while to get used to it, it's difficult, or it may be painful, and people put up with stuff that actually yes, it may be challenging, it may be difficult, it may be all these things, but with support you can get through anything and it shouldn't be painful long. So if it is, then get the support, and that can just make such a difference. Yeah,
absolutely. And I feel like they change even within the breastfeeding information, that gets changed as to what's the right way to do it. And in the beginning, in those days, there was a lot of talk about position and talking about holding in the rugby hold and the cradle hold and these kinds of things, which can be really helpful. But I find that those are helpful later on. So what I found this time, incredibly, is that everything that's more physiological works much better. So this time I've been told to feed lying on my back and to be skin to skin as much as possible, and it's really made a difference because all of my babies have had trouble with feeding. They've had tongue ties and various different issues with their mouths. So I just found it really interesting that we've gone from a real structured way of being taught how to feed to a much less structured, much more physiological approach, and this seems to be working for mums. So it's funny, we seem to, in some ways we've gone forwards a lot, and in some ways we're going back to basics,
like you said, with if it's all physiological and undisturbed, so you have that first hour and the baby's able to do the walk possibly, or he's just close enough and he or she can have that go, they've got the instincts. So I think, like you said, letting them is quite really fascinating to watch. When you've seen babies do that, they can do so much more than we think. And then of course with something like tongue tie or anything, getting support is essential. But those initial, when you're all just learning right at the beginning, when they're all skin to skin with you and that undisturbed, it's really beautiful time.
And what I've taken away as well is that you can recreate that. So with my fourth baby, his cord was too short to feed him when he was just born, so I had to wait for his placenta to be born. And so I think a lot of the skin to skin has been after, and as he'd been a little bit older in the first few weeks, and that's really important as well, is that I don't think that was sort of the done thing back then, was to get up and get on and get moving, do what you're doing, and then just feed at certain intervals. And now it's more like, take your time, go back to the birthing situation, be skin to skin, take this time with the baby, even over the first few weeks. So I think that's really a big leap in our understanding of.
Definitely. And particularly if you've had a health concern, maybe you couldn't have the skin to skin straight away. The more you can do later for yourself, even sometimes there are, like I've done it with women where we've rebirthed and redone the birth how we would have liked it to have gone, and aspects, and it was powerful for the baby and the mother to redo that and feel that connection again, and the skin to skin again, and just feeling them, letting them know they're safe. And so it's not like if you haven't got it in the first hour then everything is lost. Like obviously it's preferable to do that, have that undisturbed. I mean, it's such a big transition. It's, you don't want to be rushed in these. I would feel, for me, that you've come out of one to a completely different environment, so having that slowness, that pause, and that time with your mum is really lovely. But you can, like you said, recreate that.
And you can recreate that, and I feel like I've learnt that this time, is that you can recreate that experience, and it's okay to take that time and kind of redo the bits that you want to redo, and that's
Yeah.
perfectly fine. And I think it helps as well with our connection and our feeding, and just our own as mothers, our mental health with dealing with the shock of becoming a mum, and I think that's the same every time. I really do. So that was my first experience. I won't go into so much detail with my others, but just a few points that I've come away with. My second birth was such a contrast that I didn't want to miss out on explaining a little bit about what went on there. So this was 22 months later. I'm having my second baby with a 1-year-old, and I wasn't able to practice my hypnobirthing much, and that is a big regret. I really wanted to flag that up, because as a new mother, whatever baby number you're on, there needs to be a level of commitment to ourselves as mum, and I think if we miss that, it really has far-reaching effects. So I think every new mum, no matter which number baby we're on, needs to take some time and reflect and realise that we are a new mum all over again, and it's really important. So I didn't have that really this time with a 1-year-old, and my husband at the time was in hospital, and I don't feel like there was a massive, this is a cultural thing, but I don't feel like there was a massive appreciation of the role of mother. So everything was a little bit kind of stressful, and I wasn't prepared. And my husband came out of hospital on the Monday after he'd been in for a month, and on the Tuesday the contractions started. So this is going to be quite tight and a little bit difficult. So I chose to ignore them and remain as active as possible. I went to toddler group with my son and all those kinds of things. And these contractions again felt like rushes of energy sort of pulsating through, but there was an experience of pain this time, and it was distracting and it was uncomfortable, and it was around my pelvis, the bones. And all through that night I felt like the baby was telling me, you've got to dance me out, you've got to dance me out. And she is a dancer, so that must have been her way of telling me. But the next day there was no change, and I danced and I was getting really exhausted. And I think if I would have gone to hospital to be assessed at this point, I'm guessing, just from my understanding of other births that I've been at, that I was possibly around 3 to 4 centimetres, so in the latent phase, the beginning of labour, for many, many hours. And I think had I gone in and at this point I'd have been really disappointed, because I'd have felt like I hadn't made any progress, and I knew I had been busy contracting for a long time. And I'd have been disappointed at just how long it was taking. And I think I might have gone, right, do something, get the baby out now, because I've had enough. And then it continued all the way through the Wednesday, which I can barely remember, which is contractions. Wednesday night, the pain was in my back and it was overwhelming, and it was regular, but still I felt like doing nothing. So I'm dancing and the baby's saying, you've got to spin. And I started feeling emotional like I did before my son was born. And about 5 o'clock, I was just, in the morning, I was absolutely exhausted, and then I couldn't, and I was starting to get fearful. So I called the home birth midwife. This is in a different area, different midwife. She took blood and then dashed off to the hospital, because she said, oh no, your last iron results are too low for a home birth, so I need to go back. So she rushed off to hospital, and at that time I started to feel real pressure to birth before she came back, because I was very anxious that she was going to start talking about transfer and things that I wasn't ready for. So I felt really urgently, I must birth this baby, and I kept hearing the word spin, and so I held on to the towel warmer in the bathroom and just kept spinning and spinning, and I could sort of see in my mind's eye, because at this point I'm quite far in labour, and I can see like a whirlpool and my baby just going round and round in the whirlpool, and but I couldn't understand why, and I didn't really know enough about birth still at that point. So about 6:30 then my son woke up, and I think again, like when you're a mother already, the distraction of your children, like sometimes people love to have their children at home birth, but for me I felt still in mummy mode and I couldn't relax until he was gone. So I got undressed and he went off to his grandparents, and then after that the pain just became all consuming. I was vocalizing, I was spinning in circles, and I was getting closer and closer to the ground, which I now know from observing obviously is a real sign that we're getting really close to giving birth. But at the time all I wanted to do was get onto the ground, but I was holding onto the bathtub so that I could stay upright, because it was really important to me to get this baby out whilst I was upright as well. There's another thing that was just really important to me, but I couldn't express this. So when the midwife came in, I kept sending her out of the bathroom, and she came in and they basically encouraged me to get on my back, which it's a big, that's regret number 2 about my second birth, was that I went on my back and I gave birth to a posterior baby, so her little face came out, which was not only incredibly, as I perceived, incredibly painful, but just really against what she needed. She needed me to be upright, she needed me to be spinning, and what really needed to spin was her. She needed to turn her head around and she was unable. And she did come out, she was very unhappy when she came out. She was quite a stressful baby, and I bled a lot. So this baby moon was just fractious and difficult, and so I feel like there's so many factors again, and I just wanted to present that to other mums, that the factors that make a difference, how we prepare, our belief system, our support system, because as I mentioned, I felt quite unsupported, and like my role as a mother was quite insignificant at the time, who we choose to have at the birth. And I wish that I'd been able to vocalize to my midwife that I need to be upright. And again, so that was a preparation that wasn't there. Our relationship with those in the birthing room, do we have a plan in place? How flexible are we to that plan? So do we know what it looks like if we're going to change our plan? For example, if we go to hospital, how would we like to do things? Would we still like to be upright? These are important things that we need to know to help us manage whatever happens. And what are our deal breakers? So for me, my deal breakers should have been, I need to be upright no matter what happens. So what are yours? So that was the real contrast of my second birth. So.
It's a beautiful story, really beautiful. Like it's always challenging when we have a regret, even though when we learn from that, because it gives you the strength next time. Well, I know I'm not going to do that next time, because I can see it, and I love that she's a dancer, and the dancing that you were doing, movement.
Well, and it was dancing. She was a very fractious baby, and it was dancing that calmed her. It was only dancing in a specific way. She needed a lot of energy as a baby, but it was interesting. Words that came to me during the birth was dancing and spinning, and that's
does
what she
sound
needed.
like the position was what made it longer. Yeah, I know that sometimes you probably didn't know at the time with like rebozo techniques and things that can support that. You probably do that as a doula now, and
I do.
Those kind of things can really make a difference. I have a friend in one of the other interviews who talks about she had a back-to-back posterior baby as well, and the contractions were strong, and then they used the rebozo to help the position, which can change things. But sometimes I think the children that are coming just want that experience for a particular reason, that longer experience, and it's not necessarily wrong or bad to have a longer experience. It's again, like you said, the preparation. If you're having a longer labour, do you have that support, like a tag team almost, who aren't getting tired, because you don't know how long you don't have that awareness of time in the same way, but have you got with food and water on hand and rest, and so that you can keep going through that length. And but you did amazingly well to go that length of time, especially after having a 3-hour birth the first time. It's usually the other way around.
Exactly, yeah. So I And I think that's really important for people to know, because people go in, and just like I did, go in with, well, I've had this experience, so I kind of know what I'm doing. And no, every single birth is different. And that's why I think if you're looking for a doula, or you're looking for some support in your second, third experience, it really can make a difference. It doesn't mean you're going to repeat the same experience with a different person in the room. It really can make a huge difference, because you don't know what's going to happen with this baby. And as I said, with my third and fourth, I had long labour. I've had premature rupture of membrane. So I had a baby who decided that her waters were going to go 11 days before she was born. And managing that situation, I did inform the midwives of what happened. But as it happened, I thought she was going to come about a week before she did. So my water's been going for a little while. And she was posterior, and she needed her time. And on that day when I realised, I thought, she's not coming. I thought she was really coming today, and she's not. She won't be here for a week. And exactly a week to the day later, she arrived. So she obviously had her own plans. And I don't know why the waters ran, but there was no infection. There was no issue to it. They just ran. So again, one of those strange things. And I did monitor my temperature and find out all the things that I should be doing. But my baby wasn't ready, so for whatever reason.
Were you under pressure to do something differently during those 11 days?
So at first I let them know, but it was over the Christmas period, and I let them know, and they said, okay, well, you've got 72, because at the time the policy at my hospital was 72 hours. So after 72 hours I said, look, baby hasn't come. And I spoke to the ward, and they said, look, there's no one on labour ward, all the midwives are off with the flu. What do you want to do? And I said, like, can I leave it? And as it happened, they said, well, look, just see how you get on, it's your third baby, da, 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 da. And as it was, yeah, they were just a slow leak. When they did examine the placenta afterwards, they could see at the top of where she'd been was a leak. So she seemed to have made a hole in the top of the bags, and it was like the hindwaters that were coming slowly. So but yes, so that was again a variation of what can be normal, and it shows that everything isn't a major panic. It can, like, you would know if your baby's coming, and you would know what to do. And I knew that my baby wasn't ready. So and you knew she was okay as well, didn't you? You could sense that.
You could sense that. Because it's a funny thing with the waters breaking. I know that they're managing risk often, and if your waters break at 30 weeks, they want to keep you pregnant for longer, because it's a much higher risk than the infection risk. But if you're at term, quite often there's suddenly this, particularly now, pressure to get the baby out more quickly. And actually, I think a balanced discussion of the risks and making the choice, the mother makes the choice which she wants to do. Because my understanding is there isn't really new evidence about the risks. And the risks, although they increase, they don't jump out of the park as long as you're having, not having vaginal examinations or increasing risk.
And the really big thing, not to have any examinations, not to have anything done, because I felt like as soon as we go down that slippery slope, and I feel like I've then introduced a possibility of infection that I don't have and I don't want to have. So I specifically requested that nothing was done in those 11 days, and that I would monitor myself. And I feel like we need to know, as women, we are able to monitor whether we're well or not. We will know, and we will seek help when we need help.
Yeah, because some women have sought help much quicker, and they were right to do so. That's the thing. It's not like a one size fits all. Some people, it's absolutely right, go quickly and get the baby out, and others you've waited. And absolutely. Did he come? Was it? I'm not sure. Sorry, everyone's talking. Sometimes there's a delay on the video. But did she come quickly in the end after you'd waited? Was the birth itself fairly quick once she'd waited, or was it another long one?
Not particularly. She was one that the midwife, I had home birth midwives, and they began to get anxious because she seemed to take quite a time coming. But again, it was a case of I know she's okay, and I wasn't anxious in myself. I just I just wanted her out at that point. But yeah, it wasn't a feeling where I was anxious, wanted any help, and the midwives were there, but a lot of the time I took myself off. And I think as mums, it's okay, we don't have to entertain the midwives, and it's okay. I have a lot of mums say, what should I do for the midwives, and where should they be, and how, and do I need to talk to them about this? And I say to them, do you know what, if you want to go and hide in the bathroom, just feel free, because you know you're in your own home and you need to do whatever you need at the time to feel comfortable. So
very good point, because we're always looking after people as mothers, but everyone should be looking after you when you're giving birth.
That's right. Mm. And I don't know if it's a cultural thing, but when we have people around and we just want to entertain, and it's okay. Like when we're giving birth, we are not there to entertain. We're there to, you know,
very
exactly
good
what we're doing. Yeah, and yeah. So those are some things that I've come across. There's lots of things that would be managed differently had I been in different circumstances. But I think that what I'd love for mums to take away is that we really do know what's going on with our own bodies, and we should be confident to call out when we need help, and to wait when we feel like we need to wait. Both are okay.
Yeah. So that was baby 3. How is baby 4? That's your most recent. He's 5 weeks now, is he?
He's 5 weeks, yeah. And his birth took me by surprise. He was a week early, and I just wasn't prepared. It was a very gentle birth. It was a free birth, which I'd really wanted for my last baby. And whether it's because he was a boy, because my 2 girls were my trickier births, I don't know. And whether I just seemed to have an easier time with boys, but he came very straightforward. I didn't really know how long I had left in labour. I just felt surges were coming. They weren't particularly painful, but they weren't particularly pain-free either, as my first babies were. And they sort of picked up in a linear order, which is different to all my others. They were all, you couldn't really time them, whereas his sort of were textbook. They timed, they picked up. For most of the time I was on my own. My partner was upstairs sleeping, and my doula friend came over, and she spent the last hour and 15 minutes before his birth with me, just chilling, really. He just before he was born, the waters went, and I did notice that there was a little bit of staining to them. I couldn't tell if it was meconium, and I was thinking, now this could be a flag up of an issue. But where I was in labour, I just felt like the baby's going to come before we need to do anything about this. And he had arrived within about 10 minutes of that happening, and he did have some meconium on him, but I think it must have just happened. So again, I don't think there would have been anything differently that I could have done had I transferred or done anything once I've seen that. I don't even know whether it would have passed as meconium or not, because it was such slight staining, but I looked at it and thought, isn't that? So you could put down there that meconium has happened at birth, but again, it was all very calm, and I knew that he was coming very soon, and yeah, within about 10 minutes he'd arrived. So that was him, really. It was very straightforward.
It's a lovely birth to have for your last birth.
Yes, yeah.
If it is your last.
No, it's my last.
I thought you'd said that. I just thought I don't want to put the words in your mouth, but I thought you said that.
That's it. That's it. Yes, it was an experience, and I think having my friend there that was a doula, just that calm, like when she entered the room, is so contrasting to when somebody fearful enters the room. She came in, she knew, she didn't try to guess where I was at, which was lovely. She didn't try to put a time on where I was at, and we just sat, and I contracted, and she was there. And then I said, oh, I think the waters went, and we tried to determine what to do, and we decided we wouldn't do anything. And then I said, oh, he's coming now. And so she caught him, and so we hadn't called the midwives at that point. The big fear that I'd had surrounding this birth was that I'd had a previous hemorrhage a year ago, and I was put as high risk for postpartum hemorrhage. I was then taken off that risk by the consultant, so I was fine to have my home birth. But it did worry me, so I'd gotten a hold of the AIMS book and been reading about what to do with my placenta. And I'd written down in my notes that I really wanted a physiological third stage. And my consultant had put down and absolutely had to have an active management of my third stage. So I was hoping that the baby would come before the midwives so that the management wouldn't happen, because I really was nervous about having a postpartum hemorrhage and not being able to look after my baby properly. So as it happened, he did arrive, and the midwives couldn't make it for an hour. So when we phoned up, they said, "Oh, we can't get a midwife there for an hour." And they kept phoning saying, "What's happening with the placenta? What's happening with the placenta?" Because they were worried. And the placenta came out whole in its own time, as I'd been visualising, because by this point, obviously, I've done a lot more training and sort of understanding a lot more, and I just visualised that placenta coming whole because that was my real concern, and it came of its own accord. So that was good news, and that was what I wanted to see happen, and it came before the midwife, so there was no need to manage it, and there was no hemorrhage, that was a big concern over that birth.
And it does flag something up that actually the consultant hasn't got the right to dictate to you to have that. I know it's really challenging, isn't it? Because ultimately it's you to decline his advice. And I'm a layperson, so I'm not sure of the actual evidence, because I think there's confliction on some of the management and what that can cause about with the bleeding and so on, and truly physiological. We've got the Wi-Fi tag, so I should have put my husband's phone on silent, but I need it here for the Wi-Fi while our router's broken.
Oops.
I didn't put it on silent, so we're ringing. Hopefully they'll go away. I don't know how, I might mess up with the Wi-Fi, I'll leave it. But so yeah, we just get a bit of music. It's popular, my husband. Right, it's gone now. Sorry about that. Yeah, so sometimes again it comes down to instinct and your choice, but the pressure that you are under is not fair, really, because he should be saying what here's the evidence and his recommendation based on that, and you should be then free to make a choice. And you know, I'm glad you got what you wanted essentially through that with your with the physiological. So I said my experience of the placenta being born is I've really enjoyed giving birth to the placenta.
I did, and I had a lot of pressure from. Okay, so it's a relief maybe, or
I believe there's an oxytocin rush that happens with the birth, with the placenta, with the breastfeeding. So it's not just the breastfeeding, it happens with the placenta. Now I felt that most strongly with my first, I think. That when the placenta was born, I was like, whoa, that was really cool. Like I felt like it would have been the hormones and the oxytocin, but I really felt it, like a really big kick off it. And because all of mine have come in a physiological way, longer than they would have allowed on their protocol in hospital. Because, well, the first wasn't. The first was within the hour they usually give. His was about 40 minutes, probably delayed because I was a bit cold. And my other two were about 2 hours, I think. Really? It was partly because I was lying down in bed all relaxed and just lying down. So as soon as I knew, both times I knew I needed to be upright, very similar to your story. For the placenta to come out, I needed to be upright. So when I went upright, immediately things started happening. But because I guess I'd thought that because the baby's a certain challenge to get the baby out, and you go what big, and then you're pushing. I kind of thought it'd be the same placenta, because the placenta's got no bones and it's all floppy and it's smaller. Even the whacking great placenta I had with my third, so it just kind of whooshed out, but it still felt like a woof, like a good rush off it, and all of them felt. The first was very noticeable, but I enjoyed it with the others as well. And my third, I have the same level of traction and growling with the placenta, which surprised me because there was nothing. So I'm going to the toilet, and I genuinely thought I wanted the toilet. But it was actually, that's where I'd done most of the labour. It was actually like a kind of signal or something, because I got on the toilet and I just went, oh, and I was like, oh my God, it's got, and it was just like this, oh, and then the whole body just went, woo, I wasn't doing it. And that's when the placenta came. My midwife came running back up the stairs because she heard me, so she knew what was happening. And it was really the same kind of contractions. It was more birthing, because we always think that the birth is finished when the baby comes out, but actually it's not. The placenta's part of that birthing experience.
Yeah.
Why I think when that disturbance happens, that can disturb the placenta, but when there's no disturbance, the babies come, people still not talking, no lights, no rushing around, and then you can have that pause, enjoy the baby, maybe the skin, so maybe it's feeding, maybe not, and then your body goes, okay, now we do the placenta, and then it's all like together. Because my wish for my third was not to cut the cord before the placenta came, which I had with the other two. Cord was white and not pulsating, but I was scared of it dropping the baby or something, I don't know. And I'd been able to talk about it with my midwife, and we had that moment where I had the bowl, the placenta, the baby, me, and everything together before we cut the cord. And that was what I really wanted. It was important to me. Which I think, like, as you've said in your talk, that it's what's important to you. You find out what's important to you, and then, you know, for some people that wouldn't have been so important. I know people who don't feel it is important what happens to the placenta, whereas for me, I felt like the placenta had its own energy like a baby, and I could talk to the placenta, and I felt it wanted certain things, and I ate the placenta, and I buried the remains, and, you know, we did all these things that felt really important to me. So I got that was my third. So yeah, really lovely.
It's really interesting. And I don't know whether, did you find that you need to speak to the placenta and to understand the placenta more third time was because there's more information about placenta?
I don't know.
Or just
I mean,
something
I
that
have
came
my
along
husband,
really?
because in his tradition they bury the placenta, and I knew that, and they believe that's a connection to the land, so they bury it at their home, and you're connected to that home and that land, and family is very strong. So I already knew that before my first, so I'd started to talk. But I also had a friend who was a doula, who I probably hadn't met in my first. I knew the least, so I didn't eat it at all or do anything in my first. I just buried it, the whole placenta. But I knew to do that, so it still felt that was what my husband's culture would do, and I agreed with that. I really liked that idea. Like, it felt to me like the honouring of something that's helped grow, and it was mine, like my body, really part of me, and like a ritual, like we do with funerals and births and marriages. It felt like there's a birth and a funeral in a way for the placenta, because the placenta's finished its life. So it was like a funeral for the placenta, like honouring. I didn't call it that, but it had the elements that you would have, you know, in a funeral. So then with the second, I had a friend who was a doula who did placenta encapsulation. I did everything with the second, placenta encapsulation. I did essences, tinctures, everything. But what I found from that experience is what I liked the most was eating the placenta in a smoothie very quickly on, and not so much taking the tablets over a longer period of time, which felt more what would happen in the wild or in nature. Although I did take some of the essence and tincture in the beginning, but again, in the beginning, what I found was that the placenta's energy field was hanging around me for about 10 days with my second, and it was about it took a little bit longer for him with the tongue tied to regain his birth weight, which I was flagging it up as a concern, because I knew, although he was doing fine within their percentages of what he'd lost and whatever, because I knew I had good milk, and because my other son was still feeding, and because of how he'd been, I knew there was a problem, and I got the tongue tie sorted privately in the end. And that was on day 9. So I felt this presence of the placenta energy around me for that time, and it felt like really wise old energy, real wisdom, real supportive, and I used that to call on that in a way for strength. And I think that it makes sense energetically for me, because I know the placenta itself has a lot of iron, a lot of nutrients, and so I felt very strong but emotionally it was real supportive as well. So I think that the energy, whether it's physical or whether it's connecting in, because not everybody wants to eat. I think anyone who feels squeamish about it, I mean, I'm vegetarian, but I am 100%, but it's just like a smoothie, like with bananas and fruit, and you couldn't tell that there was meat in it essentially, but it gave me a hit. It definitely gave me a hit with the iron and the nutrients in it. So my husband managed to break 2 of our appliances because he froze it to do it the next day, and then I tried to do it with frozen bits and it didn't like it, the mixer. So I did have a bit less than I would have had, but I basically doubled the normal quantities, and just I wanted more in and put it in, and I felt that, because I was so tired from my third, that I lay in bed thinking I'm never going to be able to move again. I'm never going to get out of bed again. I began to get worried on day 3, like, am I really going to be exhausted forever? And then, yeah, and so then in the end, on the 4th day, it kind of like, woof, I'm okay. I began to come back. So that was really great. I'm not sure why your screen's gone.
That's amazing, like how much the placenta is involved, like, and how we experience it differently. Because I definitely felt a pull to deal with my placenta differently this time. I had it encapsulated, which is the first time I've ever done anything with the placenta, and I don't know whether it's because there was more information available, but I just felt like I absolutely don't want it managed. Oh, you've gone.
Yeah, I've just turned I'm still here. I just turned the camera off because it's saying the network bandwidth is low and I didn't want to lose you. I can hear you and see you, so.
Okay.
But it keeps flickering.
Yeah, no, that's all really that I was just going to say, is that I just felt like it was really something important, and I wanted that first hour or whatever it was not to be disturbed. I wanted the placenta to come in its own time. So that was my real focus this time, was that I want that placenta to do what it's meant to do and not to be managed. And I'm really happy that it did come that way. And I do feel a lot, my recovery has been incredible this time, whereas with all my others, my recovery is very slow. So I don't know whether I could, so,
Beautiful. Yeah, I think it does help with recovery, particularly if you're really pulled to do it.
Definitely
Yeah.
I was.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. There's some really beautiful stories there, and there is one thing I'd like to mention that I don't know if my camera will work again. Try it. One thing I have noticed, it's working at the moment, fingers crossed. It's kind of like, how we get all the interview done before it crashes. So is I know you mentioned right in the beginning sweeps. I know you declined sweeps, and mine all came before. Mine came at 39 weeks and so on, so they weren't really offering at that point. But I've noticed there seems to be more and more of these sweeps happening. Somebody told me recently up to 90% of women are having sweeps, and it seems like really kind of crazy that we're trusting to grow the baby and then not for the baby to come out. And I've mentioned it in other interviews, but I'd like to flag it up because I know you mentioned in a support group that you're on that a lot of women seem to be taking it as sort of a given. Is that kind of your experience?
Absolutely, yeah. I've been on a group of mums June, October, so we were all on there together, and I've what's happened in my local area is a policy now is to offer a sweep at 40 weeks. It's going to be moved back as well, so it's going to be sort of between 39 and 40 weeks when they offer a sweep as standard. So that surprised me because with my past children, I've only had one who was post dates, but I wasn't offered sweeps, so that was new to me, that everybody was being offered a sweep. Everybody on my group was being offered a sweep, and most of them were. There were a few questions, sort of like, why would I want a sweep? And the other ladies on the group would answer and say, well, this is what we do. And it was just taken as normal, and I was quite surprised because I've mentioned in my story quite a few things that have changed over the years for the better, and that we've got a lot more understanding of certain physiological things. And here we seem to have taken a step backwards in that for some reason, and I don't really know the research behind it or the evidence behind it, but we feel like birth needs to happen at 40 weeks, and at 40 weeks intervention is offered as standard. So I don't really know whether that's being rolled out across the country. I know it's certainly rolled out in my area, and I don't really know why. And I do feel like it reduces our confidence in our body's abilities straight away, because we're told, right, well, it's 40 weeks and we haven't birthed yet, so get a move on. And yeah, that seemed really strange to me this time.
Yeah, and then if it doesn't work on the first sweep, that's reducing your confidence even more, right? And then you have another one and you're still reducing your confidence because it hasn't worked yet, and then you're suddenly pressuring yourself for it to come instead of listening to your body and trusting that. You know, in healthy, otherwise healthy pregnancies.
Yes, yeah, and I also feel like it's almost a symbolic sort of handing over of, here I am, 40 weeks, here's my body, let's get the baby out, where instead of keeping to ourselves, okay, soon the baby's going to come, it just seems a different attitude surrounding it. And I was quite surprised with just that it being a standard. And I don't know if women are aware that that's not something that we have to go with, and we can set choices based on how we feel at the time.
Yeah. I think what you just said,
certainly really, having a sweep be a way to help. Sorry.
No, it's the slight lag time. But I think what's really important, what you just said, was if you feel the difference between, oh, let's get the baby out now kind of attitude, and then what you just said, where feeling in, oh, the baby will come soon. And if women sort of practice stepping into each sort of hat of that, into different circles, and experience what it feels like to them, you can really feel the difference of which one makes you feel stronger. Because offering it as standard, I think, like you said, there's a lack of awareness because it's offered as standard and we put so much trust in, and because everybody else is having them, it becomes normalized very quickly. And when you step back and question, but why, and what's the evidence, and do I need it, you might make a different decision. Again, it's always your decision, and I would really question. I'm going to link underneath the video a clip of another interview I did with a midwife who talks quite some length about sweeps, so that I'll add the information in to help people make their decision what they want to do. And certainly asking questions. I do have a family member who was offered one and didn't know what it was, and they didn't explain it to her, so I explained it and she was like, why would I want that? You know. But she hadn't had it explained. Maybe that her midwife didn't realize she didn't know, because it's so common that you're saying, oh, we'll do a sweep, we'll do that, and yeah, because it's so common, you think everybody knows what it is and would want one. And some people do want them, but I think women need to know that it's not 100% guarantee that you do the sweep and suddenly the baby's going to start coming. And ask what the percentage of success on that is, because it's not, I don't know the figures, but it's not a guarantee. So it's particularly if you
asking questions, isn't it, and finding out, you know, what's happening, and do we want that?
Yeah, what's important to you in the end. That's what it's down to. Particularly if you want a physiological birth.
And that's it. But you might feel like, actually, I need my baby out, and this seems to be the most natural way of going forward. That's perfect as well. So it's a case of really checking in with yourself and seeing where it is that you're at. What do you need out of this, and is it for you? And it's okay to make a decision on that and not have to be told whether it's for you or not. It's up to you.
Yeah. I think it's exactly what you've pointed out all the way through the interview, is that when you know what's important for you and you have that mindset, if you like, from the beginning of trusting the body and baby, letting them guide you, it's such a different feeling. Oh, the baby will come when the baby is ready and I'm healthy and well. Unless that changes, because when it changes, you have a whole new set of decisions to make. That's completely different ball game. And then you will get that hit if they, oh, I need the baby to come out, and then you can choose it. and that could be the exact right thing you need. So that's
exactly.
And that's what you've pointed out with all your stories and what you did with your 4 children.
And I think as well, just surrounding yourself with supportive, it could be women, it could be your partner, whoever it is who you feel really understands and really supports you, because that is going to make a difference to everything. I really feel like the people you surround yourself with at the time is really important.
Yeah. So the last couple of questions. What would be your vision if you could wave a magic wand over the whole birth world? What would be your vision for the future of birth and motherhood? How would you like to see things?
Yes, I'd just like to see the services become very women-centred and much more individual, instead of a one-size-fits-all system. I would love to see the services which we have, which are fantastic, to be used in the right way. So when women need help and know they need help, that it's there and it's fantastic. And when women want to be sort of left to their own devices, that the support is there for that to be in place. I think that would be the ideal, so that we have midwives, coming to homes or more midwife-led centres, because there's some beautiful ones locally to me now with just amazing facilities. So more of that, definitely. And yes, just much more support for women to make our own decisions, and lots of information for women.
Beautiful, thank you. So if there was one thing, I know it's hard to reduce down to one thing, but if there was one thing that you'd love to let women take home or love to leave them with, what would that be?
Trust in yourself. When you have a wobble, find a really good person to go to that's gonna elicit from you what your own wants are, without their own agenda on you, I think. So,
yeah, no, that's really important. Having no agenda is one of the actually it's one of the keystones of a therapy technique, a healing tool that I use. Having no agenda is the most powerful support you can have, because they're loving you, supporting you to find your decision. And that holding, it's really understated. I love that you said that. I really love that you said that, because it's just so beautiful to get that non-agendered support of someone who loves you and trusts birth, trusts you. So yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Rachel. It's been a really wonderful interview, and I've really loved hearing all the stories in more detail. And so yeah, thank you. I'm sure it's very useful to lots of people listening. So thank you.
Great, lovely. Oh, thank you very much. And I've put a link to this on my Instagram, and I'll be linking to the whole conference on my social media once I get organised. So,
you've got a 5-week-old, so do take your time. We've been organised.
Get there. We'll get. Yeah. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye bye.